Fighting rages in the largest city in southeastern Turkey. The clashes between Kurdish fighters and the Turkish security forces have left at least 4 people dead in Diyarbakir. As dawn broke, the extent of the damage became clear. Burned-out cars littered the streets. A ceasefire has been declared, but the atmosphere remains tense. The Turkish government is pursuing a policy of zero tolerance. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan says there is no difference between a terrorist who carries a gun and those who use their positions to put everything at the terrorists' disposal so they can achieve their aims. They can be an academic, a politician, an author, a journalist, or someone from an NGO. They're still a terrorist.
O kişinin aslında bir terörist olduğu gerçeğini değiştirmez.
A deadly car bombing here in Ankara on Sunday has prompted the government to harden its attitude even further. At least 37 people died when a vehicle blew up near a busy bus stop.
Umutlarım yok açıkçası.
I'm not optimistic, she says. I'm a pessimist. I think this will happen again. These people are using terrorism to get their own way. I hope they don't succeed.
İnşallah başarısız olurlar diyorum.
More than 100 people were injured in Sunday's attack. There's so far been no claim of responsibility. Turkey has been gripped in a vortex of violence since a 2.5-year ceasefire with the PKK collapsed last July.
The international community has reacted with surprise to the news that Russia is to pull out the main part of its forces from Syria. Although President Vladimir Putin offered no withdrawal deadline, he did say Russian troops would start coming home within hours. The reason he gave was that the intervention was in accordance with the situation on the ground and that objectives had been achieved. Thanks to the participation of Russian military groupings, the Syrian armed forces and the patriotic forces in Syria have been able to achieve a fundamental turnaround in the fight against international terrorism. Russia's military involvement has turned the tide of war in Syrian President Bashar al-Assad's favour after months of gains by rebel fighters. Moscow isn't abandoning its ally altogether. Its forces will remain at a seaport and airbase in Latakia province. The UN has cautiously welcomed the pullout.
When we see forces withdrawing, it means war is being taken a different step. So that's good. This has been made possible thanks to the good cooperation now between the US and Russia.
The current fragile truce in Syria has seen a rise in anti-government rallies in several cities. It's 5 years now since the bloody conflict, which has cost the lives of more than 250,000 people and triggered a major refugee crisis in Europe, began.
After talks with Syrian government representatives, it's now time to meet the opposition. On day 2 of a new round of negotiations in Geneva, the UN Special Envoy for Syria is hoping to make progress towards a concrete peace plan. The surprise news of a partial withdrawal of Russian forces from Syria has been cautiously welcomed. This opposition spokesman says we have to be sure about the nature of this decision and what it means. If there's a decision to pull out troops, then that's positive, but we have to see what translates on the ground, he says. The envoy has a difficult task, with a range of issues that have put a stop to previous peace efforts. This analyst says once we see the results of these first meetings, then we'll know if the negotiations will go on, which means a roadmap put in place by Mistura based on the first Geneva plan. And if that doesn't happen, they will call off the talks. The negotiations come 2 weeks after the start of a fragile ceasefire and coincide with the 5th anniversary of the start of the conflict. Our correspondent says the departure of Bashar al-Assad will be among the crucial points at these talks, and there are question marks about whether the negotiations really will be able to come up with a political solution to put an end to this devastating war in Syria.
Police in Berlin have reportedly launched a murder inquiry after an explosion destroyed a car travelling through the city centre. Officials say the vehicle was being driven by a 43-year-old man of immigrant background who died at the scene. The blast is being linked to organised crime. Investigators say there's no evidence of any connection to terrorism. The Volkswagen Passat was on Bismarckstrasse in Berlin's western district of Charlottenburg during the rush hour when the explosion happened. Eyewitnesses say the force of the blast flipped the vehicle onto its roof.
North Korea says it will conduct a nuclear warhead test soon. According to the country's state news agency, Pyongyang will also launch ballistic missiles capable of carrying nuclear warheads. South Korea's defense ministry said there was no indications of activities at the North's nuclear test site or at its long-range rocket station. It said that North Korea maintains it is ready to conduct nuclear tests. The South Korean president says North Korea will lead itself to self-destruction if it does not change and continues to make excessive provocations and confrontation with the international community. The North conducted a nuclear test in January and launched a long-range rocket last month. Sanctions were tightened in response. Pyongyang has issued hostile statements almost daily since then.
It's Super Tuesday again, but this time 5 US states will be holding nomination contests, and it's Florida which is the biggest prize. The Republican candidate who wins here will take all 99 delegates, but it's a state which has an entrenched Latino community built on immigrants of Cuban descent. Donald Trump made an error because in the state of Florida and the whole country, 90% of the hard work is done by the Latinos. But controversial Donald Trump is leading the Republican polls in Florida despite opposition in some quarters to his aggressive anti-immigration rhetoric. According to some pundits, the Trump campaign machine has revolutionized the way people think about voting.
You would think that with 2 Cuban senators in the GOP race, they would be a natural fit for the Cuban community in Florida, but that's not the way it's breaking. People are not so much voting for somebody because of their ethnicity or because of their gender, but because of, what they stand for.
Even so, Democrat frontrunner Hillary Clinton can probably rely on strong Latino support.
In today's primary, Florida seems to be locked up by both Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. But in a general election matchup between these two, this perennial swing state could tilt dramatically in Clinton's favor. A strong showing with Latino voters could very well decide the election. Stefan Grobe, Euronews, Miami Beach, Florida.
Well, joining us now for the very latest on the U.S. presidential campaign is our Washington correspondent, Stefan Grobe. Stefan, you're in Miami, Florida, perhaps the biggest prize on this next Super Tuesday. What's happening there and what's at stake?
Well, Seamus, Florida is the biggest prize of this Super Tuesday, and whoever wins here will be making a big leap towards the nomination. Now, on the Republican side, latest polls suggest that Donald Trump has a very, very big lead over Marco Rubio, who is the native son, who is a senator from Florida. And if he doesn't win here, I think he will drop out of the race the day after. On the Democratic side, Florida is Clinton country. She has a huge lead over her rival Bernie Sanders, which is understandable. Florida has that kind of population that is favorable to Hillary Clinton. Lots of Latinos and African Americans, lots of military people, and of course a lot of retirees, people who move to the States to have a good life after retirement. This is not the place for Bernie Sanders to launch a political revolution, of course.
And Stefan, what about the other 4 big states? Can Sanders pull another upset victory?
Well, among the other 4 states, it's particularly Ohio, where Sanders believes he has a shot. This is a neighboring state of Michigan, where he won. He had a slight victory in Michigan. I guess the other states are probably out of reach for Sanders. Let's take North Carolina and Illinois. Both have huge African-American communities, Latino communities, and they would probably go for Clinton. Then there's Missouri. It's one of the prairie states that historically have loved leftist populist, so maybe he has a shot there as well. But it's certainly Ohio, the ultimate swing state.
And of course, on the Republican side, Donald Trump. Can his opponent spoil his triumph and reshape the race?
Yes, for Trump, it also boils down to Ohio. This is a state that is a must-win state for him. Right now, he's tied there with Ohio Governor John Kasich, the native son who is immensely popular in Ohio. If he doesn't win Ohio, it will complicate his path toward the nomination. And of course, the anti-Trump forces within the Republican Party would feel emboldened. Now, Trump has canceled an event in Miami on Monday to be in Ohio and drum up support there. The Trump campaign has come under heavy fire over the weekend for the violent clashes that we have seen between protesters and Trump supporters. That had created a big backlash among the other Republican candidates, and it's not yet sure how much of an impact that will have on this Super Tuesday.
Stefan Grober in Miami, Florida. Thank you very much.
Myanmar's parliament has elected Tin Chaw as the country's new president. Chaw is a close friend of Aung San Suu Kyi, head of the governing National League for Democracy party, but she is barred from becoming president because her children are not citizens of Myanmar. Chaw says, "This is the compassion and love of the people. This is a victory for the people of this country. This is also the victory of Aung San Suu Kyi." Although barred from office, Suu Kyi had indicated she would run the country anyway through a proxy president. She was one of the first members of parliament to vote. She clapped and smiled after the result was announced. Her National League for Democracy's majority in parliament ensured a comfortable win for the party's nomination for president. Chaw commands considerable respect in Myanmar. His father was a legendary writer and early member of the NLD. He will take office from April 1st. The other two candidates who are also running in Tuesday's election will now become the country's joint vice presidents, one of whom remains on Washington's sanctions list.